They framed her. In front of students. On camera. With a bag of white powder she never touched. But they had no clue who she really was. Now, the hunted is about to become the hunter, and the system that protected them? About to be exposed from the inside out. Tuesday afternoon at Windham University, the late-day sun filtered through the windows of classroom H102, casting long shadows across the whiteboard where Dr. Celeste Harmon was lecturing on restorative justice theory. The students sat quietly, attentively taking notes. Celeste, 48, wore a collared shirt beneath a navy blazer, her calm posture seeming to slow down the space around her. She was writing the final lines on the whiteboard, her warm, steady voice echoing through the classroom. When a system refuses to police itself, what happens to the innocent? A brief silence followed. Pens scribbled. No one noticed the shadows of two police officers standing outside the door. Suddenly, the heavy sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. The door flung open. Two officers entered, one bald and broad-shouldered, named Hank Driscoll, and the other younger and slouched, named Kyle Reno. Every eye in the room turned toward them. Dr. Celeste Harmon? Driscoll asked, his tone halfway between an order and a challenge. Celeste gave a slight nod, never stepping away from the lectern. Is there a problem? Reno held out a sheet of paper. We've been instructed to bring you in for questioning. Celeste narrowed her eyes. Questioning about what? I have the right to know the reason. Driscoll hesitated for a moment, then answered, We've received a report suggesting you may be connected to the possession of a controlled substance. The classroom erupted in murmurs. A student shot to his feet. What? Professor Harmon? Celeste remained composed. I have nothing illegal in my possession. And I've received no subpoena or prior notice of any investigation. We're within our rights to bring you in for clarification, Reno snapped. Hands, please. Celeste slowly closed her laptop, her eyes locking onto the officers. I will come with you. But I want it acknowledged that this is taking place in front of my students, during an active college lecture, without a search warrant or a properly stated arrest order. Duly noted, Driscoll sneered, then twisted her arms behind her back and cuffed her. The sound of phones clicking to life filled the room. A student filmed with trembling hands, they're arresting Dr. Harmon, right in the middle of class. Celeste said nothing more. She stood tall, chin lifted, her gaze slicing through the fragile membrane between order and abuse of power. As they led her out of the room, she didn't look back. But her students did, in stunned silence. The lecture hall went dead quiet. No one stood. But every phone was raised. They didn't know that the woman they just saw in handcuffs wasn't just a college lecturer, she was the director of the FBI of the United States, who had quietly returned to the state to investigate the very shadows within a system she once swore to protect. The patrol car rolled down Riverstone Avenue, red and blue lights flashing across the windows, casting reflections over Celeste's calm face in the back seat. Her hands remained cuffed, resting gently in her lap. Though her wrists throbbed from the forceful restraint earlier, she made no sound of complaint. Driscoll, seated in the front, glanced into the rearview mirror. Quiet one, he muttered. Still processing getting busted in front of her class, huh? Reno chuckled. Or maybe working on what to tell the dean. Possession of a controlled substance sounds badass. Celeste tilted her head. I told you, I wasn't carrying anything illegal. And neither of you has proven otherwise. Well, what about this then? Driscoll pulled a small plastic bag from his jacket, inside, white powder, sealed and tagged like evidence. He held it up as if he'd struck gold. Celeste's gaze didn't waver. You expect me to believe that came from my coat pocket when I'm wearing a jacket with no pockets? Reno scoffed. You gonna deny it? Cops documented it was found in your handbag during the pre-transport check. Celeste raised an eyebrow. Then by all means, pull the body cam footage of that search. Should clear things up quickly. No one answered. The car rolled on in silence, though the air inside grew heavier. This didn't feel like a routine arrest. Celeste knew that all too well. She'd seen this performance before in cities she'd investigated, only this time, the stage was set for the wrong person. That was why she'd come back unannounced. To personally examine the gray zones in the law enforcement system of her home state, where a disturbing number of reports had surfaced about officers planting false drug charges against black citizens. Only now, these officers had no idea they'd picked the wrong target. At the temporary holding facility, Celeste was stripped of her shoes and belt. A female officer led her to a cold metal bench bolted to the wall. Seated beside her were 3 other women, all women of color, all with blank stares. No one asked questions. No one showed surprise. This scene wasn't new to them. But to Celeste, it was living proof of what she had taught for years: unchecked power always seeks to destroy what it cannot control. Elsewhere in the city, a student named Brian rewatched the phone footage, Celeste being pulled from her classroom. She was in the middle of talking about civil rights, he murmured. On screen, her final words echoed just before the mic hit the floor. You have the right to ask questions. Especially when power tells you not to. No one knew yet exactly what that video clip would change. But one thing was already clear: the system didn't need real evidence to arrest someone. All it needed was a bag of white powder, a gun on the hip, and a society far too used to trusting a badge more than the truth. At Westbridge Police Station, the mood at first was smug and self-satisfied. Officers Driscoll and his partner Reno were still laughing, convinced they'd scored an easy catch. Celeste Harmon, hands cuffed, sat quietly, her face calm, but eyes razor-sharp. When a junior officer led her into the interrogation room, no one in that building realized a shift was coming. Inside, waiting for her was a rumpled man in a faded suit, Raymond Heller, the court-appointed attorney. He started by advising her to plead guilty for a reduced sentence. Celeste looked him directly in the eye and said, firmly, "They set me up. I've committed no crime." Heller hesitated, clearly unsettled. He had never encountered a defendant this composed, or this certain. Meanwhile, back at intake, an officer was entering Celeste's information into the system. When her name loaded, the screen flashed red. A warning box appeared. High-level verification required. The officer picked up the phone and called Captain Douglas Merrick, who was in his office upstairs. Merrick, a wiry man with ice-cold eyes, stepped out, grabbed the file, and skimmed it. When he looked up, his face had changed. Shock had cracked through his composure. He walked into the interrogation room where Celeste sat. "Ms. Harmon," he said, voice tight. "I need a word with you, alone." Heller was asked to step out. Merrick closed the door behind him and turned to Celeste. "Who are you, really?" he asked. Celeste offered a small, knowing smile. "You've read my file, haven't you?" Merrick nodded slowly, sweat starting to bead on his forehead. "You're the director of the FBI. We've made a catastrophic mistake." Celeste leaned in, her voice calm but cutting. "Not just a mistake. You abused your authority. You tried to frame an innocent person. And I will not allow this to be buried." Merrick swallowed hard. He could already feel his career unraveling. He stood up, opened the door, and barked the order. "Release Ms. Harmon immediately." Celeste Harmon walked out of that interrogation room with a stillness that carried weight. No more handcuffs. No more doubtful stares from people who once saw her as an easy target. She moved down the corridor of the Westbridge Police Department, and with each step, the air grew heavier. Silence followed her like a tide. Driscoll and Reno sat frozen in the waiting area. Just an hour earlier it had echoed with laughter and smug satisfaction. Now, they could only look at each other, pale-faced, as Celeste was released. No explanations. No apologies. Not because there wasn't enough evidence against her, but because there was far too much against them. And the cracks in the system were starting to show. She stopped right in front of them. "You'd better be ready to explain your actions in court," Celeste said, her voice light as air, but it dropped the temperature of the room several degrees. Captain Merrick stood in the operations room doorway, holding his phone but unable to press a single button. His eyes drifted from Celeste to the bright red folder stamped with the Department of Justice seal. He didn't say a word, but every line in his posture admitted the truth. Things had spiraled beyond control. Before leaving, Celeste paused at the exit, where a young officer stood hesitating, as if he wanted to step forward. She recognized him. Paulson. Still young. Eyes not yet hardened. He stepped closer and lowered his voice. I read your file. I didn't know what I was part of. I didn't believe any of it, until... Celeste met his eyes. You still have a chance. The truth always needs someone to speak first. Paulson drew a long breath. I'll talk. Celeste gave a subtle nod, then walked through the door, leaving behind a police station stripped of its confidence, and a system just waking from its dream of safety. Rain fell softly outside the Westbridge Police Department as Celeste Harmon returned the next morning, this time as the lead investigator. Inside the interrogation room, Officer Paulson was already waiting. No more psychological armor. No more excuses. Just guilt and a desperate desire to make it right. I didn't think it would go this far, Paulson began, voice low. Celeste didn't respond right away. She sat across from him, her gaze steady. She didn't yell. She didn't push. Just silence. The kind of silence that forces a man to fill it with the truth. Paulson took a breath, then spoke quickly. They told me it was a simple pickup. A middle-aged professor tied to controlled substances. No one would question it. But when I saw your name come up in the system, I knew I'd been lied to. Celeste tilted her head slightly. Who gave the order? Lieutenant Manning. But I've heard it doesn't stop with him. Paulson glanced at the interrogation camera. Your case, it's part of something bigger. They're targeting high-profile people. Especially people of color. To discredit. To send a message. Celeste's eyes narrowed. What about the district attorney? Paulson swallowed hard. Gregory Sutherland. He's been taking evidence packages from Manning for a while. Some of those cases went to trial in a matter of weeks. Same playbook. Every time. Celeste nodded slightly. Exactly as she suspected. This wasn't just misconduct. It was a machine. Meanwhile, in a dark office on the third floor, District Attorney Gregory Sutherland, a man who'd won dozens of convictions thanks to evidence supplied by Manning, was on the phone. We've got a problem, he said. Harmon's not just anyone. Her name just flagged on a federal system. A cold voice on the other end snapped. Wipe everything. Erase all internal camera logs. And Paulson, shut that kid down before he opens his mouth. But it was too late. Celeste wasn't just recording Paulson's testimony, she was building a case. The arrests Manning had overseen showed a disturbing pattern: rapid detainment, no warrant, and evidence always traced back to the same unit. Inside the internal surveillance room, Celeste stood before a corkboard lined with fresh printouts. Beneath the photos of Driscoll, Reno, Manning, Sutherland, and several other names, she pinned a strip of red tape with one sentence. No more room for silence. Celeste sent the entire file to a secure address, back to the Department of Justice. One by one, the patterns surfaced: duplicate case reports, signs of planted evidence, and most damning of all, a direct link between District Attorney Gregory Sutherland and a local political influence group. That night, in a sealed federal meeting room, Celeste presented everything to the Inspector General's team. This isn't about a few bad actors, she said. It's a system. One that's been fed by unchecked power for years. A female inspector nodded slowly. We've seen this before, in Rampart, in Baltimore. But I've never seen anyone crack it open from the inside, like you. Celeste didn't smile. I'm not cracking it alone. I'm just the one who turned on the light. News of Celeste Harmon, the black woman handcuffed in front of her own students who turned out to be the director of the FBI, spread like wildfire. National media descended. Every major outlet splashed the same question across their front page. How could this happen in a country of laws? Within 48 hours, the video taken by a student, the moment she was arrested mid-lecture, had gone viral across every social platform. The hashtag Justice for Celeste topped the charts. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox News couldn't ignore it. Some hailed her as the woman who wouldn't bow, while others accused her of sowing division, despite the facts being painfully clear. At Windham University in Westbridge, where Celeste had quietly taught as a humble scholar, the atmosphere shifted completely. Crowds gathered outside City Hall, holding signs that read, "If they can do this to her, they can do it to anyone." Meanwhile, a small group criticized the public reaction, dismissing the outrage as systemic overreaction. But the majority had found their voice, and this time, they weren't backing down. Then came the most explosive development. An internal audio recording from the police department leaked online. In it, a male officer's voice rang out, clear, cocky, and cracking with fear. "Shit, if I'd known who she was, I wouldn't have touched her." The recording confirmed what many feared: Celeste's arrest wasn't an accident. It was targeted. It was racial. And it was intentional. That weekend, Celeste appeared on 60 Minutes in an unannounced interview. She didn't speak in anger. Her voice was calm, razor-sharp and steady. "I wasn't arrested because I'm the director of the FBI," she said. "I was arrested because I'm a black woman in a button-down shirt, standing in front of a whiteboard." And in their eyes, that was threatening. Those words hit like a national reckoning. By the next day, thousands of black professionals, teachers, doctors, lawyers, posted photos of themselves in work attire with the caption, #Still a suspect. In that moment, Westbridge was no longer a quiet southern town. It had become the epicenter of a nation grappling with its own conscience. After a closed-door strategy meeting with federal inspectors, Celeste knew she could no longer operate in the shadows. This battle wasn't just about collecting evidence, it needed a voice loud enough to wake the entire city. And so, on Monday morning at the Illinois State Hall, before dozens of cameras and expectant eyes, Celeste Harmon stepped up to the podium, not to defend herself, but to declare the start of a new chapter in the pursuit of justice. As the spotlight illuminated Celeste, no one saw the woman who'd been handcuffed in a classroom just days before. Her curly black hair, her piercing gaze, they were the same. But she was no longer a victim. She was a leader. "I could stay quiet. Accept a private apology. Let this pass," Celeste said, her voice steady and resolute. "But if I do that, who will speak for those with no power? Who protects the people with no one behind them?" She wasn't speaking for herself. She was speaking for people like Khalif Browder, jailed for 3 years without trial simply because he couldn't afford bail. She was speaking for those crushed by a legal system where justice became a privilege, not a right. Celeste rejected all offers of a quiet resolution from local officials. She knew that accepting would mean becoming part of a conspiracy of silence. Instead, she demanded a fully independent investigation, with all evidence made public and accountability pursued to the fullest extent. She also launched a national campaign titled Justice Unveiled, a movement to support the wrongfully accused and push for systemic reform. The campaign quickly gained national momentum, with thousands joining and sharing their own stories. In a televised interview, when asked if she feared going up against the entire system, Celeste simply smiled. "Fear is natural. But silence because of fear, that's the real danger." Celeste's story became a source of inspiration, especially for black women, who are often overlooked or underestimated in society. She proved that with resolve and courage, one person could spark massive change. Over the next month, a sweeping federal investigation uncovered what had long been buried in files and hard drives. And today, the Interagency Task Force formally completed its summary report, a scathing 200-page indictment in preparation for the upcoming hearings. And as they say, the truth didn't have to scream to be heard. Stone by stone, the system began to crack open. Internal access logs from the Westbridge Police Department revealed a shocking truth. Lieutenant Manning had illegally granted internal access to public surveillance feeds in order to monitor Celeste before her lecture. His logging credentials were also used to access surveillance footage of multiple wrongfully arrested black individuals over the past 3 years. Meanwhile, prosecutor Gregory Sutherland was found to have fast-tracked prosecution in at least 17 cases based on evidence provided by Manning, 9 of which were later confirmed to show clear signs of fabricated evidence. Driscoll and Reno, the 2 officers who directly arrested Celeste, initially denied wrongdoing, but after being confronted with surveillance footage, they admitted to following verbal orders from a superior, claiming they never checked the paperwork and believed Celeste was just a black academic and easy to deal with. The charges filed included Lieutenant Nathan Manning, conspiracy to violate civil rights under federal law, Section 241 U.S.C., abuse of authority, unauthorized tampering with public surveillance systems, and evidence fabrication. Gregory Sutherland, prosecutor malicious prosecution, abuse of prosecutorial power, ethics violations, and conspiracy to falsify evidence. Officers Driscoll and Reno, unlawful arrest procedures, abuse of authority, and accessory to evidence fabrication. That same day, investigators finally uncovered the identity of the mysterious voice on the other end of Gregory Sutherland's call. After multiple layers of verification, the person was confirmed as Illinois Lieutenant Governor Raymond Keating, a vocal supporter of hardline law and order policies and a silent funder of so-called anti-drug cleanup initiatives in low-income neighborhoods, where the majority of residents were people of color. Keating didn't directly authorize Celeste's arrest, but the recorded phone call with Sutherland revealed he knew exactly who she was and still urged the action forward. The decrypted audio transcript included this exchange. "If she's who you say she is, then get it done. Before the press starts sniffing around." "And if this all blows up?" Sutherland asked. "Then you don't know who I am." "I didn't say anything." "You didn't hear anything." A 200-page report from the FBI submitted to the Department of Justice confirmed this was not an isolated case of misconduct, but a coordinated network designed to target and eliminate influential black voices in southern Florida communities. 2 months after Celeste's arrest, a federal court held an 8-day public hearing at the Federal Justice Tower, drawing national attention. The courtroom was packed with reporters, activists, and victims previously prosecuted under Manning and Sutherland. Celeste did not sit at the plaintiff's table. She sat quietly in the back row, observing every testimony, every frame of footage played, including the now iconic image of herself being handcuffed in the middle of a classroom. Lieutenant Manning bowed his head as internal messages between him and Sutherland were read aloud. "She's getting too much attention. We need to make an example out of her. Push it to broadcast ASAP. Don't let the media get ahead of us." When Sutherland was called to testify, he tried to deflect responsibility, claiming he had trusted the documents provided by police. But the evidence, traced IP logs, emails, and even a condo purchase made using off-the-books funds funneled by Manning, shattered the last wall of his defense. Driscoll and Reno both pled guilty and requested leniency, admitting they acted wrongly because we thought no one would ever find out. In the end, the sentences were handed down. Nathan Manning, 15 years in federal prison, permanent removal of rank and badge. Gregory Sutherland, 12 years in prison, permanently disbarred from practicing law. Driscoll, 5 years probation, 2 years of community monitoring. Reno, 3 years in prison for actively obstructing the investigation. The judge concluded, "This wasn't just a violation of law. This was a warning. When power is exercised without ethics, the entire system sinks to the bottom." As for Illinois Lieutenant Governor Raymond Keating, he had already resigned. When the evidence was presented to the State Ethics Committee, Keating refused to speak to the press, but the public pressure became overwhelming. He was forced to hold a press conference to announce his resignation, citing it as in the interest of political stability. However, under mounting federal pressure, a separate criminal investigation was launched to examine Keating's role in directing state resources toward targeting socially and politically influential figures. Celeste never mentioned Keating publicly, But in a closed-door meeting with local community leaders, she said one thing. Sharks don't live at the bottom, they swim near the surface. But light? It always shines from above. When the trial concluded, Celeste stepped out into the press frenzy without answering a single question. Instead, her eyes found a group of students standing in the distance, holding a handmade sign. Justice wasn't given. It was taken back. She nodded. After the media storm and public outrage, though the hearings had ended, the real work had only just begun. Westbridge was no longer the quiet town it used to be. Protests, town halls, and civic pressure forced local authorities to act. Mayor Linda Whitaker, who had remained silent during the incident with Celeste, now faced calls for sweeping reform. She convened an emergency meeting with the city council, where Celeste was invited as a special advisor. "We can't let this happen again," Celeste said, her voice calm but unyielding. "There must be independent and transparent oversight over law enforcement." Under growing public pressure and Celeste's unrelenting advocacy, the Westbridge City Council passed a series of sweeping reforms. Creation of a civilian oversight board, an independent committee made up of community members with the authority to investigate misconduct allegations within the police department. Mandatory body cameras. All officers are now required to wear body cams while on duty, with strict regulations on data storage and public access. Anonymous reporting mechanism, a secure system that allows both civilians and officers to report misconduct without fear of retaliation. These reforms weren't just a reactive gesture, they were the first meaningful steps toward rebuilding trust between law enforcement and the community it was meant to serve. Still, not everyone embraced the changes. A number of veteran officers voiced resentment, claiming they were being unfairly targeted. But under Celeste's leadership, and with steadfast support from the people, the reform process moved forward. Celeste knew that overhauling an entrenched system wouldn't happen overnight. But she believed that with persistence and moral clarity, Westbridge could become a model for communities across the country. 1 month after the council's final vote, Celeste Harmon stood before a modest brick building on Grove Avenue, a part of town once called the Gray Zone of Westbridge. The building had formerly housed an insurance office. Today, it bore a new sign: Harmon Center for Legal Empowerment. Inside, the first wall displayed a bold white quote carved into raw wood. "Justice doesn't end with a verdict. It begins when the victim stands up again." Celeste didn't open the center to punish the system, but to guide those who had no voice, those who had been silenced the same way she once was. Now 50 years old, she chose to start over, not with walls, but with bridges. Every week, she hosted a silent circle, where people could share personal experiences of injustice. A single mother whose home had been raided without cause. A college student dragged from his car forward looking like someone. A black veteran jailed overnight for refusing to answer a question that had no legal basis. And one by one, they began to speak. Celeste didn't just help them write complaints or prepare legal files. She gave them something more powerful: self-worth, courage, and the belief that they deserved to be treated with dignity. One evening, after a circle session ended, an elderly woman approached Celeste, tears in her eyes. She gently took Celeste's hand and said, "I'm 74 years old. But tonight, for the first time, I don't feel powerless." Celeste smiled. "No one is ever too old to stand up," she replied. "And no one should have to stand alone." It wasn't just the return of justice. It was the return of dignity. That late afternoon, golden sunlight poured across the stone steps of Windham University. The crimson maple trees rustled in the autumn breeze, as if whispering the memory of a day when an entire system bowed its head to hide the truth. Celeste Harmon sat quietly on the long bench behind Wexler Hall, the very place where she'd once been handcuffed and led away under the stunned gaze of her students. But today, she wasn't being taken. Today, she had returned as a symbol of unshakable resolve. No shackles. No lowered gaze. Only the calm strength of someone who had walked through the storm and stayed behind to hold the door for others. A few students noticed her from afar. No one approached with questions. Just a few respectful glances, and a young woman paused to greet her, clutching a worn copy of the History of Resistance tightly to her chest like a silent thank you. Celeste offered a gentle smile and a small nod. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. A message from the Harmon legal team. The single mother in Franklin County was acquitted. Another win. Celeste stared at the screen for a long moment. Not out of surprise, but because she understood, victory didn't come from an uprising. It came from every moment someone refused to bow. To the young, it was a spark of hope. To her, at 50, it was proof that age doesn't dull convictions, it plants them deeper. She pulled a navy blue notebook from her coat. The first page held a handwritten reminder. Don't wait for history to be fair to you, write it yourself. Below that, a growing list of communities she planned to reach with her mobile legal initiative. Rural towns. Forgotten voices. Celeste closed the notebook and stood. The breeze swept through the campus courtyard, lifting the hem of her caramel-colored coat. She turned her back to the bench, not to forget it, but to move forward. That bench was no longer a scar. It was a milestone. The beginning of a journey where Celeste Harmon, the woman once arrested in front of a classroom, now writes the rules for an entire system.